Greetings, everybody. Just going to go over my executive branch PowerPoint for you here. Starting out, just a little bit of quick review. Remember, we have a legislative, executive, and judicial. The legislative makes the laws. The executive's job is to actually carry out the law. Honestly, that's not what the president looks like a lot of the time when he's doing this, but as I record this in the middle of COVID-19, for instance, the president is carrying out the laws of the nation. He is carrying out what powers he has in a state of emergency that are granted to him from Congress, from the Constitution. He is acting on giving aid that was authorized by Congress, for instance. His job is actually not to make laws and policies. That's a lot of times what they talk about, but their job is actually to carry out the law. It's also the largest of the branches, not the intention of the founders. The founders intended that Congress would be the ones running things. But if you look at the president commands and armed services, with a little over 2 million people in active duty, another 500,000 in reserves. He oversees a massive bureaucracy, such as with the EPA, the FCC. I mean, just insert alphabet soup here. He oversees all of that. The president is our one leader, problem that goes back to the Articles of Confederation. We didn't have one clear, distinct leader. We have that one leader now. And that person is actually, since World War II, since if you study your world and American history there, America became the superpower of the world, and thus is the leader of the free world, is the president of the United States, and could be considered one of the most powerful and influential people in the world. The qualifications, you won't really need to focus too much on this. This usually wasn't even an issue until maybe your lifetime for the students watching this. Constitution says you have to be 35 years old. You have to live here for the past 14 consecutive years, and you must be a natural born citizen. Like I said, it was never an issue until Barack Obama. And then there was speculation about where was he born. I've gone over that in class previously, and where was he born doesn't matter if he's born to an American citizen. It also was briefly brought up again with John McCain, because not John McCain, but Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz was born in Canada to an American parent, but still, remember, an American citizen, natural born. Presidents also have, they're not necessarily required qualifications, but it seems like all of our presidents hold certain characteristics, ideals, or they have certain traits. They're usually Ivy League. For instance, Donald Trump went to the Wharton School of Business at Pennsylvania, very elite school. Obama went to Harvard. I want to say George Bush went to Yale. I think, I'm just shooting from the cuff here, but I think Bill Clinton may have gone to Columbia. The point being, they don't usually have like a community college background, or even, they may go to the premier school in their states, but they usually have a very advanced education from a very elite school. And I'm not saying that you can't be the president if you don't go to one of them schools, but I am saying that that's where your competition for the job likely went. They've been bred for this job for a long time. For the most part, they have proclaimed to be a Protestant Christian. We've had religious minorities before we had ethnic minorities. They have all been male. We have never even had a female vice president. Usually I ask these questions in class, but for instance, who was the last president to be president without previous government experience? The answer will actually go back to Dwight Eisenhower. A lot of times common guesses I might get might be Reagan, but Reagan was the governor of California. Most of the time they were governors. Sometimes they're senators. Barack Obama was a senator. We had Hillary Clinton running. She had been a senator. She had been a secretary of state. They've usually held a high elite government office somewhere. And right now it seems like we have a thing for liking senators and congressmen. We used to mainly go for governors. They are elected through an electoral college, which, by the way, as I record this in COVID-19 crisis, we're also seeing census. Some census commercials out there. So fill out the census. It does determine how many votes we get in the electoral college, or rather through the U.S. House of Representatives, which then becomes part of our number for the electoral college. So make sure you pay attention to that. On the federal level, it is the only job that is term limited. So the president is limited to 2 4-year terms per the U.S. Constitution. He also runs with a vice president. So let's talk a little bit about what the vice president does. Officially, he has one job, which I didn't even underline. It's not that important. He's officially the head of the Senate. He rarely does that job, ceremonially for a couple of days at the opening of a new session of Congress, but that's not what's going to happen. We haven't seen in a long time now a vice president have to step up and replace the president. If you go back to your parents' or grandparents' generation, it was pretty common, and we put a lot of attention and we put a lot of effort on who the vice president was. FDR had died, so his vice president was important. We had seen vice presidents run for president. Richard Nixon was Dwight Eisenhower's vice president. He ran for president. A lot of times a vice president later runs for president. As I record this, Joe Biden is the presumptive Democratic nominee. He's a former vice president. There was a time when vice presidents often became president. Kennedy's assassination, Johnson becomes president. Richard Nixon wins in his own right 8 years after he had been Eisenhower's vice president. And then Gerald Ford has to assume his job. Ronald Reagan did not die in office, but his vice president ran and won election in his own right afterwards. And after that, we're in this lull where we haven't really seen a lot from vice presidents after the presidency, or after their vice presidency is over, the presidency of who they serve under is over. We haven't seen a lot from Al Gore. He did run for president. We haven't seen much from Dick Cheney. And now maybe we can be in this time. Joe Biden's running for president. Maybe we'll see another president come from this time. They also have to meet the same qualifications. So sorry, Barack Obama can't be your vice president. They have to be eligible. There is a succession. Unless it's TV and movies, we have never made it past vice presidents. But in TV and movies, we have gone through a lot of these. So we're going to talk about the president's job. The assignment I'm going to give for this here in April 2020 will relate to the president's job. Some of these roles are constitutional. Some have just been appointed to him over the years. First off, he is the chief executive, which he can do through issuing executive orders. There's a limited scope in what these can be. So, for instance, he could change like the uniform of the military. He can set codes for military. Don't ask, don't tell was a popular policy, popular one to talk about, at least with LGBT. It became very unpopular over the years. And so the president had the authority to either pass or repeal don't ask, don't tell. And that was a popular point of discussion that became the president's role as an executive order that he can handle. He can direct administration. This is usually more day-to-day government offices. And the president, in the course of his office, is going to pass several hundred executive orders, generally speaking. It did become a little joke. Trump, in his early days of presidency, would make a signing ceremony out of his executive orders. So there you go. Pineapple goes on pizza. You know, there's actually little downloads you can make and make little jokes of Trump making executive orders for fun. He is the head of the law enforcement system. So there is a joke going around. It's maybe not the best example of the role, but the president pardons a turkey. Bush was known for making some funny statuses and points and all that here and there. The president actually is the one who appoints all federal judges, whether that be Supreme Court or a lower appeals or district court. The president is the head of law enforcement. So let's just talk about this for a second. Barack Obama reduced sentencing guidelines for nonviolent drug offenders. So that could be something he could do. There was a governor of New Jersey running for president in 2016 named Chris Christie, who said potheads better enjoy it while they can, because if I'm president, I'm going to enforce the federal law, and I am going to stop this recreational use of marijuana. A week later, he dropped out of the presidential election. He can. Usually immunity is not associated with the president giving it. Usually it's associated with a court system. So the way immunity would work is like, hey, if you plea against this your former crime boss, then I'll grant you immunity for whatever you've done. But I want you to testify against your leader here. Pardon and an amnesty. There is a difference. Pardon is directed to one person. It has your specific name on the document. Amnesty would have a group of people who committed a crime. So Vietnam War draft dodgers, people who burned their card. There has been talks over a couple of presidencies, but it hasn't really gone anywhere, to give amnesty to anyone whose only crime is that they entered the country illegally, and then give that person a pathway to citizenship. It's something that's been talked about since Reagan. And I want to say Reagan actually did do this. The president can also commute your sentence. President Obama did this a lot. He may not necessarily forgive you of a crime, but perhaps he reduces your sentence. He did this for a lot of nonviolent drug offenders. So moving on, he is also the chief diplomat of the United States. So a couple of American history points here. Woodrow Wilson and his 14 points, he was acting as a chief diplomat. He wanted to negotiate, but remember, he has to get approval from the Senate. What he doesn't have to do is he can still be a mediator between other nations. Jimmy Carter's Camp David Accords, if you go look up, it's actually probably Jimmy Carter's biggest accomplishment as president, is getting the presidents of Egypt and Prime Minister of Israel to sign a peace agreement with one another, which is a pretty big deal. Didn't need approval from Congress or anything if he just wants to mediate between other nations. Jimmy Carter had this dream of a peace in the Middle East as his legacy. The first job actually given to the president, he is the commander-in-chief of the armies and the navies. I know you can find stories on Trump certainly acting on this. I mean, if the president orders a bomb to be dropped, he's acting as commander-in-chief. There's been missions, you see here Barack Obama saluting a fallen soldier who's coming home. You can also find footage of Trump doing similar things. But should we go to war, the president picks the general who's going to be in charge. The president picks, if you're a military kind of person, what the terms of engagement will be. I'm intentionally leaving out a little bit of what Trump does. You'll see why. The reason is going to be I'm going to give an assignment where you have to find what Trump's done. So if war breaks out, or in this case, COVID-19, the president gets a little bit more authority, which goes back to a thing we talked about, where in times of peace, you generally get more freedoms. In times of war, you lose freedom, unfortunately. The president is the legislative leader. So he gets this from his, he has the ability to sign all laws into action or veto them. So he often acts as a legislative leader, trying to push a certain initiative that he may like. He also, the Constitution says, shall from time to time address Congress concerning the state of the Union. Remember, state in this context means condition, condition of the Union. Washington did this as a speech. It didn't go well. Probably like you listening to this video right now, wasn't paying much attention. So he decided from then on he would actually write a letter to Congress every year. And that's how it went until Woodrow Wilson, 100 and some years later. Woodrow Wilson decided to make it a radio televised address that he did from Congress, and it's been that way ever since. It's turned into a dog and pony show, if you really want my opinion, though. And so those are basically all of your constitutional roles. These are more like roles that they're a little bit more murky. They've just kind of come along with the job. The president is the party leader. There is certainly a flavor of what the Trump Republican Party looks like. Is it the party of Reagan, or is it the party of Trump now? So the president campaigns, and you can find several examples of it. If you have trouble finding an example of this, you need to send me a message, because the president is the leader of his party, and in doing so, he may campaign on your behalf. Trump campaigns for congressmen, for senators, for governors. Takes great pride in those who won with his endorsement. And then he gives out positions to those who supported him, which we'll come back to later on. The patronage system goes back a long way, and I want to save this and talk about it later. These are some videos I can post. Chief of State, he is the symbolic leader of the nation. So in class, I usually tell the story of how George W. Bush actually ruined my 2006 summer vacation, because he decided that he wanted to greet the Prime Minister of Japan by welcoming him at Graceland instead of the White House. Closed the whole thing for a day. And then the next day, all of us who wanted to go on the day Bush was there were basically backlogged. And so my visit to Graceland in 2006 was pretty crowded. He's also someone we look to when there's a tragedy. Some famous addresses on this. If you want to go Google them, Reagan's address after the Challenger exploded, George Bush's address the night of 9/11. When there's a virus breaking out, what's the president's message to us for this? I did throw in bonus. He is the chief guardian of the economy. Basically, however, you can find research on how the economy does under Republicans and Democrats, president or Congress. But we give a lot of the blame, fairly or otherwise, because of how the president responded. So I'll move along and show Usually I show these in class. This is a little newsreel of the Prime Minister of Japan in Graceland. A little joke I dropped in. I'm not sure why I did it or when I did this, but I've had it in this PowerPoint for a while, so I'll leave it there for you to check out. As I'm teaching this at the present moment to seniors, you're getting towards that college level, so have fun with this. The president's administration, you always hear Trump administration, Obama administration. It's just those who work for him. Right now, you may hear this term applied a lot with Dr. Anthony Fauci, who is the infectious disease doctor. And so he's part of the Trump administration response to the pandemic, right? White House staff, the press secretary was known for a while. In classes a few years ago, students always knew because Saturday Night Live had all these bits about it. It was Sean Spicer, who was portrayed by Melissa McCarthy. Then there was Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who was also a bit famous for a while, but most of the time, nobody knows who these characters are. I don't even have anything underlined here. I would not worry about this. There is a President's Office of Management and Budget, which the President makes a budget, Congress presents a budget. Ultimately, it don't matter. What matters is what Congress passes. The National Security Council. This has been around for as long as anyone who's been alive has been around. There's been a National Security Council, and here's who was on it. The nation's always got a position on where we stand in defense. The vice president's mainly on it because, if he assumes the president's job, he has to know these things. Then there's various other characters who may be invited to be a part of this. It's supposed to warn the president about if there's going to be a terrorist attack. What's the chances of 9/11 happening? What's the likelihood of success if we bomb Syria? Those sort of things. Other offices, most of the time, you won't hear too much about these. One I probably should have, there is actually a pandemic response team. You usually don't hear about them. We hadn't needed them in years, but here we are. So executive departments, the one thing that you really need to know about is that there is a cabinet. If you go Google the President of the United States cabinet, one of the first things that comes up should be a Wikipedia page on it, and you can see what the cabinet is and who's in it. They're called secretaries, except for those who are, or except for that one who is the leader of the Justice Department, who is known as the Attorney General of the United States. Everyone else is a secretary, however. So I'm just going to go through these really quickly, and if it ever did come up on a test, otherwise, if my future students end up looking at this, really the only ones you would ever need to focus on knowing are these first four, the ones that George Washington created. So George Washington wants a State Department. This used to be at one time like one of those stepping stones to president. If you have memories of APUSH or American History 1, the corrupt bargain of 1824 and Henry Clay wanting to be Secretary of State under John Adams. It was a stepping stone. Several of our early presidents had been the Secretary of State. It is in charge of issuing passports. It is in charge of helping set foreign policies and setting immigration policies for America. But that big thing, the reason we care about it is that interaction with foreign nations, that setting foreign policy. The Treasury Department right now, this is a big one. There's this name, Steve Mnuchin, in the news. Some of you may have, you or your parents or both have already received a stimulus check right now through the CARE Act from coronavirus. And so Steve Mnuchin, the Secretary of Treasury, was involved in the news concerning this. But they're also in charge of collecting our taxes and setting the budgets, or helping set the budget and helping us collect and spend money. I do like Mad Dog Mattis, General James Mattis. He was the first Secretary of Defense. If you want my opinion, the best pick Donald Trump ever made. Was agreed on by Congress. I think he got pretty much universal acceptance. So the Defense Department actually incorporates our nation's military. There are actually Joint Chiefs of Staff. The Army, Navy, Marines are actually one department in this sense. You probably learned in elementary school as 5 branches. You may notice one is missing. And then, of course, there's the U.S. Air Force, all of which are under the direction of the Secretary of Defense. Usually a former military guy or woman, but doesn't have to be. The Justice Department, this one's been in the news a lot back when there was an impeachment going on. So just depending on what the current events are at the time, you may or may not hear this name a lot. William Barr, as I recorded this. The Interior Department, in charge of everything that's outside. Funny joke, comment if you understand why. But the Department of Interior is in charge of everything outside. The reason being, if we took a U.S. map and we drew out everything that's inside the borders. So it was originally about Indian territories, and it ends up being about anything that's about preservation and conservation of the environment. Department of Agriculture, pretty much what it sounds like. Most of these are what they sound like, honestly. So I'll just, you can pause them if you want to write about them or anything. I did highlight this one. Again, I wouldn't worry too much about it. Commerce and business. As weather affects business, it's a part of this, but patents and trademarks actually in the Constitution and overseen by the Department of Commerce. Department of Labor came along as a result of, one way I could teach this is saying that these are a part of a response to a problem that we may have in the nation. So if you go back to American history, there was labor union movements at this time. So there's a Department of Labor right now in the news because unemployment stats. These are things the president needs to know about. These are things the president gets blamed for, whether he deserves it or not. So they help set labor policies and help determine unemployment and hopefully help set policies to keep you safer at work. Health and Human Services also in the news a lot right now, especially because of this one, Center for Disease Control. They're the ones setting the guidelines for how to keep us healthy when there's a pandemic. They're normally just in charge of distributing Medicare, Medicaid, and determining how well that should be done, setting food policies, keeping our food and medicine safe, testing food and medicine, and approving it. And skip one. Yes, I did. HUD, Housing and Urban Development, currently led by a medical doctor. So I'm teaching this at the present moment in Raleigh and Wake County. So I could shoot over to Durham, where the Durham Bulls ballpark was. This was one of those examples of after white flight of the 50s and 60s, there started to be in these inner city issues. And so trying to rebuild and deal with those issues, trying to low income housing, trying to address homelessness. The DOT, traffic issues, deaths and vehicle crashes was very high in the 50s and 60s. We had a group trying to help address those issues. Energy, this is after the energy crisis, OPEC embargoes, nuclear energy is becoming a thing. So we had a Department of Energy. Education, same deal. It's been discussed about getting rid of a couple of times, and the Reagan and the Trumps even talked about possibly dropping it. So it's been around for, your lifetime, my lifetime, maybe your parents' lifetime, but it's newer than you may think. Remember, education is primarily the state's deal. Veterans Affairs, one of the more recent, but this time you got a lot of World War II veterans coming of age. You got Vietnam veterans starting to have issues, so Veterans Affairs became an issue. Homeland Security came along after 9/11. If there was one you need to know about after 9/11, or after the first four, you would need to know this one rather. And this is where we put the Coast Guard. This is actually a lot of things we primarily had before anyway, but after 9/11, we kind of consolidated the government a little bit to try to make it work better. The Secret Service, of all things, it used to be under the Department of the Treasury. I'll let you go Google that story if you want to. They used to be in charge of, and actually still are, and supposed to be in charge of actually hunting down counterfeiters. The Coast Guard, this was actually under the Department of Transportation at one time. It's been under DOT, it's been under the Department of Defense, Department of War, since the TSA. So those of you who fly, you've heard of them. FEMA. FEMA could be a response to a terrorist attack. It could be a response to a pandemic as it is right now. I do have a couple of childhood friends who've grown up and they're working in issues now that are dealing with FEMA. You can shoot me a message and ask about that if you want. This is actually part of the North Carolina State Standards as I record this at least. You did need to know at one time at least what these three are. If I'm sending you the PowerPoint, ask me. I'm pretty certain you still do need to know about them. They are important. Executive agencies are just if they're under direct control of the presidency, basically the president appoints the director and they oversee something. Usually it's pretty intuitive what that would be, but the president appoints whoever will oversee Social Security. CIA is a big one, especially because that's now a cabinet level position. Small Business Administration. At one time, this was a wrestling. Linda McMahon was her name. She actually was a part of WWE at one time, organizing that. She was a director. Supposed to be overseeing what are the issues small businesses in America may have. They may also just be something carrying out a mission. There's NASA was created under Eisenhower. There's a very famous speech where Kennedy said that he wants to challenge this nation to go to the moon. So it's part of NASA. Environmental protection. Start realizing in the 60s and 70s that might be a good idea. Some of you may hold that near and dear to your heart. Regulatory commissions, as the root word may look like, there's regulate. So Federal Reserve, it regulates nations' money. It's currently acting in a very, very complicated system, but they're trying to actually help the economy not go into a tailspin right now with COVID-19. They can also regulate various industries, whether that be the FCC. They can regulate airways. They can regulate transportation with various rules that pilots or truck drivers or train conductors have to follow. I talked about FCC. They can set consumer product safety. A good one as a kid, if you remember the toy aisle, the toy Target or Walmart or wherever you went as a kid, you have to have certain safety standards, right? So Consumer Product Safety Commission could be what makes a rule that, like, a small toy has to have a warning on it, not suitable for children under 3 years old. Anything that's not food and may have a safety problem, it may be on here. Electronics, shocking hazard, right? Government corporations, there's only a few. There's the post office, which it works a lot like UPS if you think about it. You give them money, they'd give you a service. If you want to ride a train, you can look up what Amtrak stands for. As I record this, I've forgotten. There is a third. I want to say it's the FDIC. When you go to the bank, there's an insurance company that secures your deposit. They are technically another one. There may be more, but these are the two that show up on tests. Basically, they operate and provide a service. They're supposed to collect enough money to basically cover their fees associated with doing this. They're not necessarily supposed to be making millions of dollars off us. We hear this term bureaucracy. It's usually used in a bad term and a bad word. Bureaucracy is just all these people in government who work and carry out government duties, and oftentimes get associated with being political waste when there is an election. Red tape. Outside of a social studies classroom, the only time you may hear this is in an election. I'm going to cut the red tape. It just means you're going to cut the regulation burden on the country. If anybody ever played SimCity as a kid, it used to be one of the little jokes, like if you clicked on the city hall, it would tell you how many miles of red tape your city had. Basically, the more rules and regulations you made for your city, the more red tape you had. My best example of what red tape looks like in your life would be like getting a driver's license. And sometimes in classes where I play a little round of Family Feud, right? I might say, like, tell me a step you need to get a driver's license. And hopefully I have a student say, well, you got to take driver's ed. I say, all right, that's good. What else? And hopefully another student may say something like, well, we got to have that log of hours. Good. We got to pass a driving test. Good. We got to get a paper from the school. We're passing our classes. All right, good job. You have to pass a vision test. You have to have insurance. You have to have a permit for a year. And I get students to list off all these things, right? And all of those steps are hassle and paperwork required to get something done in a bureaucracy. And you'll find that no matter what, there's always hassles and steps involved. I'll try to tell a quick version of another story about this too, but it has to do with Social Security. So the deal was in Chicago back in the 80s, you had to get, when you went to Social Security, pretty standard procedure, you had to have an original birth certificate, you had to have like your proof of residence, and then there were various pieces of paperwork. But the point of this story is that that paper concerning your original birth certificate. Well, there was a lady who went in one time and she did not have an original birth certificate. It was lost in a house fire back in like the 60s. And what she had was an endorsed copy of her birth certificate from the courthouse. And by the way, the courthouse of the county you were born in should have a copy of your birth certificate if you ever need one. And that's what she had. And the people who were the bureaucrats of such and Social Security said, well, we don't know how to handle that. The paperwork's very clear. It must be an original birth certificate. So we're going to have to get back to you. This just goes on for months. They finally end up finding one character who, has the rational sense to just say, yeah, okay, that's acceptable, and lets them have it. The spoils system. A lot of people think that after James Garfield is assassinated and the Pendleton Civil Service Act is passed, that the spoils system ended. It did not. The spoils system is very much alive and well, ladies and gentlemen. So theoretically, we would pick the best and the brightest, FDR's brain trust, to help us solve our nation's problems. I'll talk about Trump since he's currently the president. I'll try to be a little bit equal and talk some trash about Obama too, but Betsy DeVos might be a good example. I had a video of Congress where she was specifically asked, how much money has your family given to the Republican Party? She comes back with, I'm not sure. And then Bernie Sanders says, well, I understand it could be $100 and something million. I think the number he says. To that be accurate, she said, yeah, my whole family over the years, maybe. So I'm just saying, her family gave a lot of money to Republicans over the years, and she became a Republican Secretary of Education. Another one was the original Attorney General. His name is slipping me as I say this, so now I'm a little bit embarrassed. Jeff Sessions, that was his name, Jeff Sessions. He was a senator from Alabama, and he was one of the first senators to actually endorse President Trump as a candidate. And to thank him, Trump offered him the position of the Attorney General of the United States. It became very controversial. Barack Obama had run against Hillary Clinton, and when he became president, he offered Hillary Clinton the role of Secretary of State. You didn't really see Obama appointing Republicans. You don't see Trump appointing Democrats. So they still appoint, hopefully, qualified people within their own party. There's a joke in law school. What do you call the person who has the lowest passing score on the bar exam? The answer is a lawyer. So there's not many jobs, maybe 5 to 10% of jobs actually require you to pass a test. And I mean, being highly qualified could just mean something like you have a high school diploma or you have a degree. It could mean you pass a test, but it should mean you're qualified for your job. Most jobs, however, do not have a qualification test. If it's the president's cabinet, the qualification is you get approved by the Senate. So it can be a still very murky waters here, really. Still, hopefully what we see is the president looks among his party and he finds, well, here's a person I like who understands finance well. And that's the person he appoints for Treasury. He finds somebody in his party who's really good in foreign affairs. And so here's going to be my Secretary of State. So what we kind of have is like we still pick those people in the party who the president likes and who have already supported the president. So thank you for watching. And please check out whatever left is on the webpage to see your assignments for the week. Have a good day.